Greetings, welcome to the third recap of Project Dig. I hope you are having a great day so far. Project Dig is a 2D multiplayer automation survival sandbox game that I'm developing here entirely on Twitch and uploading the VODs to YouTube. So, like I said, third recap. This last 2 weeks basically have been dedicated to UI. So I decided to continue to use my UI solution that I developed for Crea, my previous game, and just pull that over into this new engine. And so we had to change a lot of things. I had decided to change naming scheme and just a few things that we had to go through. A lot of it, but for the most part, it was easily translated from that previous engine over to this one. So I'll go ahead and just kind of go over that, how it's all working, and that'll just be it for this recap. It's a lot though. Sounds like it's not, but it is. So, and this UI solution, what I had decided to do, and this was 2 years ago, is make it so that everything is an element. Everything derives from an element, and then we have this concept of an element group, and an element group is an element as well, and so that means that you can have element groups that are contained within other element groups and kind of create this tree of elements that represent the UI element. And so there's always, the trunk of the UI, the initial element that everything is added to. And that is what we call our dialogue, which is also kind of our view. The view is the base class for, it's an element group that it can be rendered by itself, and it has some extra logic for rendering, and we didn't do it now, but it will also have support for controllers and whatnot. So it's kind of the base class for rendering, because sometimes you don't want it to be exactly a dialogue, such as the HUD is not actually a dialogue. And so a dialogue is a view that has these different sections that split up the that UI view vertically. I want to say horizontally. And so we actually, I can just show you what we have. That probably makes sense. So here we go. So here's our little dialogue. And so we have a lot of UI elements here, and I'll talk about those. But this is a dialogue, so you can see it has two different sections. There's this header section, and then the content section. I have different types of sections that typically represent or are used for different types of information. This isn't what the UI will look like for Crea. Sorry, for Project Dig. It's what it looked like for Crea. And all of this, before I forget to mention, is actually coming from this window right here. This little, well, it's called window.png, but this image represents all the graphics for the UI. We're not using a lot of these here. We use them for Crea. So we pick apart this little texture and pull out all the information we need. And so that's the dialogue and how it's working, and the view. And so one thing I should mention is the style sheet, which is kind of what's driving a lot. It's driving all the styling for the UI. And Yeah, we don't have a really good representation of this yet. Right now it's like an any map, which means that it's a string that maps to like anything. And that string is, and I might be able to actually optimize this some now that I look at it. We'll see. Yeah, I probably could, but anyways. So it's a map that it's kind of like CSS. It allows these different elements or classes or file names to, or not file names, element names to be able to specify a styling. And it has this concept of like priority based off of specificity, where it's like the more specific something is, the higher the priority is for that. And so I can show you what it looked like in Crea because I don't have a really good representation in Project Dig yet. But this is what it would look like where we have like, oh, here's the font and this is the default value. Here's the font size, the default value, but then we can also have like the title, which is, you know, the that's the element name. But then other places we might say like, hey, we have a font color, and paragraphs or labels, which are element types, can also have a value. And then they can also specify like the class. So if it has a class, or even a state, such as highlighted as the state, inactive is the class, and category is the element name, it can be able to change that. And yeah, I'll get into like how it can determine what is the proper name. The proper styling for an element. So that's this is like a nicer version of how it could look. What we currently have is over here, which is just this like super flat styling that just mostly has the default values. It's what I was using to set up this information here, just so we had something. And so one really cool thing about the style sheet system is that I have these element attributes that I have set up. So let's take such like a label, for example. A label will have like a font size, font color, etc. And these are element attributes. And so what that does is whenever we are setting up our element, we say we want to set up our attributes, and that'll go through and set all of these up, which this is a templated function. And here that says, hey, the current style sheet that is associated with this element, let's go ahead and set it up. And that means we need to go to we pass in the attribute as a reference, and then we go to setup here, which will actually go through and pull out all of the possible attributes that could be associated, styling for the attribute that could be associated with that element. And then it also like sets up the priority for it. So it's like, hey, this is, you know, this priority. So we want to check that first. Like if it's a higher priority, we want to check it first. And it also like figures out like the distance, because you can have like a parent be styled. So you could say something like, hey, whenever this parent or the parent of this element is highlighted as meaning it's like moused over, then change this element to look like this. And so all of that's set up here. So it's just being set up, and then whenever the state changes for an element, like you actually mouse over it or you mouse over the parent, it will update the styling, and that will go through and actually like try to update the various attributes and determine if they have changed, and if so, then it needs to like say it's dirty and redraw everything. So that's how the styling works and the element attributes are working. So really, it's just all of the various aspects of the UI are broken down into these elements and ways. So we have a label, we have a paragraph, which represents multi-line text. We have the scroll list, which is pretty cool. We can actually scroll through here. You can see the text is changing. I don't have a scroll bar yet. We have an animated image. Earlier, we just have like a normal image, a static image. We have this button here that can be updated. It's a little stat bar. We have this text edit information that allows us to like delete and change things. Yeah, and so that's the UI. Like I said, it took about like 2 weeks to do. I think it's pretty good. This should be able to get us like, I would say 80% of the way there with the UI solution that we need for Project Dig. There's controller support that I have to think about, and then of course, like once we decide upon the styling for the UI, then we can start making it a little bit more specific. You know, maybe we aren't going to actually use scroll lists, or I mean, we probably will to some degree, but yeah, it might be that we use a lot of animated images, in which case maybe we need to change something and make it so that those are better or more interesting, or perhaps I need to add support for like particle effects on the UI and make that like actually fully supported. Yeah, that's the UI. If you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask here. I will have the comments enabled on this VOD, and I'm looking for feedback on how to make these recap videos better. I think that we're getting kind of close to the Patreon goal of doing these on a weekly basis, and I think that will make it a little bit better. And also have some ideas on how I could make this better. One is actually not doing it on Twitch, but right now I'm a little pressed for time, so unfortunately it is what it is. But hopefully you guys still find this video useful. Speaking of Patreon, I have some awesome patrons that are supporting me, and I just wanted to thank them really fast for them like just, you know, kind of initiating that support. I know it's hard to get things rolling whenever, you know, you're starting from nothing. So yeah, I just want to thank them and mention that if you do pledge or become a patron, you can get access to the source code. And yeah, thank you very much, guys. I hope you are enjoying these videos, and I'll see you on the next one.